Top 3 reasons why collectors are afraid to sell their collections in 2025. The first reason is primarily monetary, and that is that they have a fear of taking losses. While there are some collectors who have been collecting for years and years and years, and they have a minimal dollar amount invested in their collection, or you have other collectors who have done purely budget-based collecting, meaning that they don't spend any large amounts of money on video games. They're always getting video games at a discount. They're yard selling. They're doing the thrift shop thing. They're bartering. They're trading. For those types of collectors who have a minimal monetary investment in their collections, the fear of taking any kind of losses isn't as great for them, because in most cases, regardless of how much of their collection they sell, they're going to wind up on the positive side of the ledger, meaning they will have made more money than they would have spent when collecting their games. However, there is a large amount of collectors who didn't start collecting until the mid 2010s, leading up to 2019 and then into 2020. And a lot of collectors actually have started building or built their collections post 2020. And if you're one of those folks who has built the lion's share of your collection from, like, say 2019 to 2023, 2024, you've probably paid the most historically high prices for retro games ever, right? And again, unless you were one of those collectors who was savvy enough to negotiate deals, leverage Facebook Marketplace, and just get really lucky. Unless you were one of those people, you probably have a significant monetary investment in your collection, especially if it's a big collection. And to me, a big collection is a collection of, say 3 to 5. If you got 300 to 500 games, that's a significant monetary investment into a collection, right? Odds are, if you have 300 games, you have at least $10,000 to $15,000 invested in the collection, unless all you've been buying is old sports games and like shovelware. If you have any type of desirable games in your collection, you do have some monetary investment, especially if you got those games within the last 6 years. And so because of that, there are a lot of collectors who have toyed with the idea of selling their collection, but they're just afraid to take any kind of losses. They're waiting, they're watching, they're hoping that at some point the retro gaming market will get hot again, that there'll be a lot more buyers again, and they're really hoping that there will be a spark that will create a window of opportunity for them to sell and maximize their profits and hopefully break even. Because I doubt, if you built your collection during the pandemic or any time between 2019 and now, if you try to sell your collection, you are not profiting anything, especially if you paid market price for your games. Again, if you were able to negotiate deals, if you got lucky, if you found a lot of the games in your collection for $1 to $10, and they have an average value of $30 or so, then you're in a pretty good position, because you can sell and you won't really feel like you took any losses. But for a lot of collectors, that is not the case. So that is the first reason why a lot of collectors are really hesitant to sell their collection. The second reason why collectors don't want to sell their collection is they are afraid that they will not find their games again. They will not find some of the games that they've really taken time to locate and source and curate. And this goes back to the yard selling thing. Obviously, if you sold your entire collection today, all you would need to do is go on eBay and you could quickly assemble that collection again. However, you'd be assembling that collection at the highest premium possible, right? So for a collector who's built a lot of their collection through a combination, right? Maybe they bought a couple games on eBay. Maybe they got 30% of their collection from yard sales. Maybe they got 40% of their collection from, thrift stores, mom and pop shops. Maybe they got 20% of their collection from GameStop by leveraging sales. You know, if you are someone who felt like a lot of the heavy hitters in your collection, a lot of the good games in your collection were rare finds or just games that you were just lucky to come across, you're going to be really hesitant to sell those games because you're going to remember how long it took you to find that game and how many times you've seen it since finding it, right? And there are some games for collectors that you only get to see in the wild once. And there are some games that you never see in the wild. I remember for a long time I wanted a copy of Super Turrican 2, and I had only seen it once in the wild. And the one time I finally found it in the wild, it was $300, and I just couldn't bring myself to pay that much for Super Turrican 2. So, and you have collectors who, especially if they have decent games in their collection, more rare, more sought after titles, it's going to be difficult for them to get those games back once they sell them. And if they do get them back, odds are they're not going to be able to get them back at the price that they originally paid for them. And so this, strikes a lot of fear in the hearts of collectors when they consider selling, especially if they want to keep their collection or they want to keep certain games. They don't want to sell because they don't want to have to go back out and source those games again. And so I think that is another big part of the reason why a lot of collectors today aren't trying to sell their games, especially if they have one of a kind pieces. They're going to hang on to them. They're going to sit on them and hope that at some point, a better window of opportunity shows up where maybe there's more inventory in the market, there's more games in the market for them to buy, to where they feel comfortable that if they sell certain games, they can easily get them back without having to resorting to eBay or things like that. And so that is another reason, right, why I think collectors are afraid to sell their collections. So the first reason is that they're afraid to take losses. The second reason is that they're afraid that they'll never find the games again. And then I think there is a third reason why a lot of collectors are afraid or don't want to sell their collections. For a lot of collectors, a lot of who they are is tied up in their collection. Their collection is a big part of their identity. They have a lot of sentimental and emotional ties to their collection. There are a lot of memories tied up in their collection. When they look at certain games, they probably remember a memory from a gaming convention or a weekend video game hunting trip, or a one of a kind find at a thrift store, at a pawn shop. And so when you have that type of sentimental attachment to anything, not just video games but anything, it's going to be difficult for you to part from it. And unless you genuinely have to, unless there's like a situation that is forcing you to give up those items or trade or sell those items away, you are not going to be able to emotionally bring yourself to sell those games, because they're a big part of who you are. And not only that, in video games being a big part of who certain people are, it also gives them a sense of belonging. It gives them a sense of belonging to a community that they genuinely feel a part of. They feel like it's like their video game collection gives them access, gives them status, gives them the right to be able to speak on certain things retro, or have conversations on video games. It's kind of like a stamp of approval. That's a big part of the reason why a lot of retro gaming YouTubers, when they're making a video, behind them is a large stack of video games. It's part of the reason why when I make my videos, I aim the camera a lot of times at my video game shelf, because it in some ways it signifies to whoever's watching that, okay, this is a person who actually does collect video games. He's not just a guy talking about a hobby that he doesn't partake in. He actually has a collection of video games. And so in some ways it kind of creates like a little stamp of approval, and it grants you some authority when speaking about the hobby of collecting video games and building and curating a collection. And I think that feeling of belonging and that feeling that you're a part of a community is, you in some ways you can't really put a price on that. And so that's more valuable, I think, to certain collectors than whatever they would get dollar and cents wise for their collection. And I think it's these top reasons why you see a lot of collectors holding on to their collections. And I know I've been talking a lot about selling collections, but the reason why I made this video today is because a lot of the comments that I got on my past couple videos, I've seen where a lot of people say that, you know, collectors are hoarding, they're hoarding, they're hoarding, you know, they're not selling, they're not letting go, they're hanging on to their collection, they're not gonna let them go. And it really made me think, well, why wouldn't a collector want to sell their collection? Like, what are some of the main reasons for that? And I think at a macro level, I think these three reasons are the main three reasons why I think most collectors have not sold yet. And most collectors will fall into one of these buckets, whether it be the fear of taking losses, the fear of not being able to find the games again, or the feeling like you'll lose your sense of belonging and all the sentimental ties that you have to the games. For me, what bucket does a Y2K fall into? I think 80% of me falls into the second bucket, the bucket of I'll probably not find these games again. There are a lot of games that I've gotten in my collection through negotiations, through trades, through deals, through being out in the wild. And some of these games I just don't think I'd find again. And if I do, I'd have to pay a significant premium for them. When I think about, you know, my top tier PlayStation 2 games, it's going to be next to impossible for me to find Rule of Rose, Blood Will Tell, all the Silent Hill games. It's going to be really hard for me to find that. When I think about games like Last Resort, that doesn't sit on shelves every day. When I think about my import Sega Saturn collection, the only way I'd be able to get these is via eBay, right? So, I mean, it's over for that. And when you just start looking at like Sega Saturn, Sega CD, and the PlayStation 1, those games and those consoles, games for those consoles have become even more scarce and rare, especially in good condition. And so when you find some of these games, you're gonna pay a real premium. Especially when I think about games like Silent Bomber or, you know, Jackie Chan Stunt Master or Einhander. Some of these games are really tough to come by. And so for me, I would say that I fall in the bucket of I want to sell, but I want to sell some games, but there are certain games that I just wouldn't ever find again, and they mean a lot to me. So what does that mean for me? This is why I'm always talking about curation, because there's parts of my collection that I know I'll never sell because I'll never want to have to search for these games again, and I really enjoy these games. The games that I hang on to the most really are a lot of my shoot 'em ups, my Dreamcast stuff. I've got a lot of attachment to Dreamcast because I had that in high school. I had a PlayStation in junior high. I didn't have a Sega Saturn, but I had friends who had Sega Saturn. And the Sega CD, although I never had it, I've always had a desire for a Sega CD and I'd seen it. And I have memories of watching demos of the Sega CD at different game shops that I went to. And so there's like this almost like memory-based nostalgia that I have for the Sega CD. And so that's where it comes from with a lot of these. And that's why I think like these top two shelves will probably never be touched. These two shelves will always be in my collection. But then when I think about things like the GameCube, which I really do love the GameCube, but I'm not super married to, that's where the rationale and the reasoning becomes a little bit different. So all in all, I believe in curation. I don't believe in just selling off the collection. And sometimes curation means selling off a few pieces here and there, which I've done. You guys, if you follow the channel, you know I've done that for years. I've talked about curation at least 3 or 4 times every year on this channel, so that's nothing new. But I do think that when it comes to doing a mass sell-off of your collection or doing a bulk sell-off of your collection, this is where these 3 reasons come in. So let me know what you guys think about that. I'm interested to know your thoughts there, and I'll catch you in the next video. It's the Y2K Collector. Take it easy.